Rick Nelson has brought a special guest with him from NPPD, and of course Rick is our manager at Custer Public Power. Before we begin our interview, we want to remind you that you can call us if you like. If you have a question about something during the show, call 872-2801 and you can talk directly to Rick or our guest this morning.
That's a good idea. Let's take some phone calls. If you've got something that we spark some questions out there, give us a call. Rick?
Good morning, Bob.
Nice to have you back.
It's good to be back.
And Mark Becker, always a pleasure. Welcome.
It's always a pleasure to come to Broken Bow.
It is great to see you back. And again, let's tell folks what your position is with Nebraska Public Power.
With Nebraska Public Power, I'm the media relations specialist. I talk to all the newspapers, the TV stations, and the radio stations across the state.
Well, that's an important thing for NPPD, is that clarity, that open transparency, if you will, as far as what you're doing. People like to know what's going on.
Yeah, they want to know what's going on with electric rates, what's going on at the power plants, and in this case, up here in Broken Bow, been a lot of interest in the wind farm that's going to be coming in.
Sure, and you've kind of been out just educating people about how that process works.
Yes, we have.
That's great.
Mark, sometimes we don't know very much about the future when we don't look in the past, and I know Rick wanted to kind of do a little history lesson here this morning on the past, and maybe we can start there and evolve into talking about the latest edition of your portfolio with wind. Do you want to give us a kind of a history lesson here, guys?
Okay, well, wind is a part of our energy resource mix, wind power, and we started on this clear back actually in 1997 with our Springview wind farm, which is now basically gone away because it was hard getting parts for that. But we've been adding wind power. Our first one was Ainsworth. Our board of directors has established a goal of having 10% of our energy resources to come from new renewable sources, and the primary one is wind. It's probably the energy resource that can be built quickest and be available. But we got to remember too that wind is a intermittent energy resource. The wind, despite what people think here in Nebraska, the wind does not always blow. So we do have to have our base load sources of energy, which is primarily our nuclear power plants and our coal-fired plants. But we're going to add another wind farm. We've got a new one up in Bloomfield. It's the Elkhorn Ridge Wind Farm, which is run by Midwest Wind and Edison Mission Group. That's an 80 megawatt farm. That's been operating since 2009. They just broke ground on a Laredo Ridge Wind Farm near Petersburg. That should be up and operating by the end of this year, another 80 megawatts. Crofton Hills, which is up actually near Bloomfield, is expected to be operating in 2011. That's about 40 megawatts there. And the latest one we're going to have is another 80 megawatts here just east of Broken Bow. We spent some time with people the last 2 years doing wind studies on the site. We went through a request for proposal. We took in bids. We worked to get the lowest possible price for the purchase of electricity. NPPD, that's all we're going to do. We're just going to buy that electricity. The facility would be constructed and operated by a group made up of Midwest Wind and Edison Mission. They'll be called Broken Bow Wind LLC.
Okay, Mark, backing up just a minute to the farm that's been operational, has it lived up to expectations? I know you have goals as far as the output on these, and you talk about the wind doesn't always blow.
Yeah.
How's it measured up so far?
Well, Ainsworth has had a pretty good success. Okay, we hit about 35 to 40% what we call capacity factor. That's exceptional for wind farms. Now you have to compare that though again with the base load facilities. Cooper Nuclear, its capacity factor probably running right today is probably 100%. Okay, so we have that problem. The other day I was talking to a lady on the phone, and she was so certain that the wind was always blowing, and the two operating wind farms we have here in NPPD's portfolio were generating less than a megawatt as compared to Cooper Nuclear, which was probably running about 790 megawatts. So people have to keep that in mind. They're not always going to be there, but they're there's a good resource for renewable energy, and we don't know what the future is going to be on legislation. That may come down and say you may be required, the federal government may say 20-25%. We feel that that's not necessarily in the best interest of Nebraskans, though.
Now, with NPPD's projected plan to get 10% from renewable sources by what year?
2020.
By 20.
Yeah, by the end of 2012, we'll be halfway there.
And how does that 10% compare? I don't know how much communication, I imagine you have a lot of communication with other states and other entities. Is that kind of a general plan for people, companies across the country? 10%, is that a realistic goal that kind of runs standard, or?
Well, we aren't mandated by our state to have what we call a renewable portfolio standard, renewable energy standard. Our board has undertaken that and gone with 10%. Other states have mandated that, either by their public service commissions or legislation that's been in. But it's anywhere from 10 to 20%. It seems to be a number that's been used.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Mark, does that, in that area then, since this is a public entity here, and other states, of course, have private push in dollars for wind. Do they excel because of have you made comparisons between the private and the public sector?
Well, one thing is about wind development is we're a public power state. We don't get some of the tax credits that a private wind developer would be. Everyone says, geez, we see all these wind farms in Iowa. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, yep, I've driven through Iowa, I've seen lots of turbines. They get incremental tax breaks, basically. It was starting at like almost 2 cents a kilowatt hour generated. So they're getting some federal, they call it federal production tax credits.